Hello, I'm Erin Palmer, Team Rayceen Productions co-host and moderator. Joining us today is Christine Jacobsen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, Erin.
How are you doing today?
Very good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for being here today. Before we get started talking about your book, Dancing Around the Truth, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yes, thanks. Thanks so much for having me. It's really an honor to be able to talk about my experience in my book and hopefully help some other people that may be going through the same thing. And I wrote my book trying to make sense of the DNA surprise that I had in 2018. And I published it during the pandemic, and it's been doing quite well. And it's wonderful to be able to speak to people on social media about my experience.
That's wonderful. Please tell us a little bit about the title of the book, Dancing Around the Truth, and what the inspiration was for the title.
So Dancing Around the Truth was definitely inspired by how dance is so prevalent in my life. I was a professional dancer, and when I did the DNA discovery, I found out that my biological father was a dancer, as was my biological grandmother and grandfather. So my bio dad's parents, and my bio dad's parents, my grandparents, were professional dancers during the Harlem Renaissance, and they were known as the Negro Esters. And then my biological father was known throughout the United States as a dancer throughout the 1950s and 60s. And then he went overseas and continued to work there. And I was, as I said, a professional dancer. I was in the Broadway show 42nd Street. So dancing, I knew, had to be in the title. When I designed the jacket, I also felt like it represented dancing. And then it took on a deeper meaning because I realized that my mother was dancing around the truth of my biological heritage. And I came to realize that I danced around the truth in terms of how I viewed myself as a white person.
Please tell us about the general premise of the book and how that relates to the title in terms of Dancing Around the Truth.
Well, the general premise is that I discovered that I was biracial, and at the age of 65. And so I had a racial reckoning at the same time that our country was having a racial reckoning. And I felt like, as I said earlier, that I danced around the truth of how I thought of myself as one of the good white people, and how I came to realize that I had a lot of internalized racism that I had never really owned up to before. So that was the journey that I went on in writing the book.
The book contains themes of internal bias and white privilege and what you just mentioned of the concept of being a good white person. Can you talk a little bit more about those themes and how they play out through the book and what they mean to you personally?
Again, as I said, I thought I was one of the good white people. My parents were very progressive for the 1960s, but later on I sort of came to realize that their form of progressiveness maybe even had a little bit of fetishization to it and tokenism, and they loved Black people. Black people were always in my house. They loved Black musicians. And so I thought, yeah, this is how I grew up. And my parents were Danish, and the Danish are historically known as very tolerant of religions and cultures, other cultures. And they were, maybe not so much now, but they were. Mm. And so I had this lifelong belief that, I'm not racist. Other people might be racist, but I'm not racist. And that, really resonated throughout the writing of the book, and definitely during George Floyd's murder, and the reckoning that was happening in this country at the same time, and um, the disconnect, the fracture of my identity, in that I wanted to honor my biological heritage, yet I had been raised as this white woman. And as my son reminded me, you grew up white mom, you had white parents, you had all the white privilege. There's no way that you can be Black. There's just no way that that can happen. I think he was really a little bit worried about me going Rachel Dolezal on him. So there was a moment where, I wanted to embrace my newfound culture. I wanted to wear head wraps, and I wanted to wear ethnic clothing. And that was the first time I had been made aware of that there's such a thing as appropriation. Maybe I had heard it, but I didn't really understand it. So there was a lot of deep learning that went on after my discovery and in the process of writing the book. Deep learning about African American culture and the more well-known African American writers and thinkers of both in the 20s, 30s, and all the way up to today.
I love that concept of deep learning, and not just the self-reflective part, but that it can take place across generations with our children, that's part of how we learn and grow as adults in terms of communicating with the next generation and our children, and that can take place across those boundaries. I think one of the interesting things about the book is the discussion and question around let's talk about race, and how you discovered that some of the response to that is for people to say that they're tired of talking about race. And that is a pretty common phenomenon. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and tell us how you respond when people say that they are tired of talking about race.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big eye opener for me as well, because I also lived in this kind of fantasy land that we were in a post-racial culture, a post-racial time after Obama. And yes, I think I say in my book, where was I when all those people were talking about race? Because I was never having conversations about race until it became part of my identity, and I had a deep vested interest in learning about it. What I've done personally to deal with that, because it really was difficult for me to find people that I could talk to about race, both Black and white. And I joined an anti-racism group, and we meet twice a month, and we've been doing that for 2 years. And that has helped me tremendously in being able to verbalize how I feel about race, and being able to talk about times when the awareness comes up that I've either said something racist, or had a racist thought, or some of my misperceptions and biases. And we discuss those things. And that has been extremely valuable for me, to be able to speak about what I'm learning in terms of racism. And yeah, if somebody said that to me today, I'm tired of talking about race, I just listen. I listen with a lot of love. I listen with a lot of tolerance, and try to interject whatever the conversation may be about, what I've learned, and perhaps be an inspiration just based on the fact that I've done all this learning as a white woman.
I think part of what's interesting is that the work of anti-racism is continuous, that there, in my opinion, is not a fixed endpoint. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how you continue the work of anti-racism, and how you catch and call yourself in when you're confronting potential racism in your internal sphere and internal circles.
Yeah, I've definitely gone on a trajectory with it, because initially I was very like, I'm going to cure racism. I've got the answer now. And I am going to, like point out when you're being racist or, biased. And that didn't go over very well. Nobody wants to hear that. No white person wants to hear it. And so I kind of swung back with joining the anti-racism group to reflecting and getting more knowledgeable about my oppression, how I oppress myself, how I oppress others, and developed more of a tolerance for when people are speaking in racist terms. A lot of times I will approach people with a level of curiosity. If they say something racist, I'll ask them, what makes you feel that way? Or why are you saying that kind of a thing? Maybe not even that, that's a little judgmental, but mostly I would just approach them with curiosity. Why do you feel that way? I've stopped really trying to give lessons. I think that was what I initially tried to do, but to try to help people become aware. And that I think that's the only thing that I can do, is help people to become aware that there are other viewpoints, that there are other ways of thinking about something that a lot of us think is a very fixed point of view.
That's interesting. How has writing this book changed you? What's different about you now?
Writing was always something that I had wanted to do. It was, when I wrote the memoir, it was to try to make sense of what was happening to me. And it really went in a whole other direction, and it has helped me to continue to learn and to be interested and focused on learning about other cultures, learning about my place in the world as a white person with other cultures and marginalized people. And it really has opened me up in a way that nothing else had.
So what has been the reaction to the book, personal and public? Anything that has stood out to you?
I have a friend who calls me his fairy godmother because I gave him my book and he read it and he said, I'm going to go get a DNA test. And he did, and he discovered that he had 2 sons, and one of whom has now given him a grandchild. And he was a sperm donor, but he had no idea that he had children in the world. So, I mean, that's one aspect that just really warms my heart. I'm very happy when that happens. I haven't had really any pushback, and I guess I'm pretty lucky that way.
Do you have any plans for future works or anything else that this inspired in you for future creations?
Well, I definitely feel like I want to continue to explore the journey that I'm on in terms of anti-racism. And so that's something I'm working on. And then I'm also working on a piece of fiction.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm hoping that you can share with us how people can learn more about you, how they can learn more about your book, Dancing Around the Truth, and where they can buy your book as well.
Yes. Well, my website is christinefromqueens.com. And my book is available on amazon.com in both audiobook format, ebook, and paperback. I also have a presence on Instagram, Christine's Story, and on Twitter, the same handle, Christine's Story.
Thank you. Viewers, you can find the links in the description. Thank you, Christine, so much for joining us. Is there anything else you'd like to close out with?
Just like an enormous debt of gratitude to you for such a wonderful interview and for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for your work. It's no small feat to write a book and have that tangible creation that's come from your brain and exists on paper now, and on computers. So thank you for your work, and thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Erin. You too. Bye.
Bye. Viewers, please follow Team Rayceen Productions on social media and subscribe to the Team Rayceen YouTube channel. Most of all, thank you for watching.